The room fell silent as the old widow slowly placed a worn envelope on the polished table, eyes trembling with quiet dignity. Across from her, the billionaire's son leaned back with a careless grin, certain nothing inside that envelope could matter. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments what time it is and where you are watching from in the world today. Let's start this unforgettable story about pride, pain, and a truth no one in that room was prepared to face. The lawyer adjusted his glasses while the widow's hands shook slightly, as if the paper she carried held years of buried memories. A soft murmur spread through the room when the son chuckled loudly, whispering that $10 was hardly worth a meeting. The widow heard every word, yet she stayed quiet, staring at the table where her late husband's name still echoed in her mind. For her, that small inheritance was not money at all, but the last proof that someone once loved her deeply. But to the billionaire's son, it was a joke, something he planned to laugh about later with his wealthy friends. The lawyer finally opened the envelope carefully, his expression unreadable, as everyone leaned closer to hear the truth. Outside, the tall windows, the afternoon sun faded, and inside the room, the air grew heavy with a tension no one understood yet. Because in only a few minutes, that simple $10 inheritance would begin a story that would change every life there forever. The lawyer slowly placed the $10 check on the table, and the billionaire's son burst into laughter that echoed through the quiet room. He leaned back in his chair, clapping sarcastically as if the entire meeting had turned into an embarrassing joke. To him, $10 was less than the tip he left for waiters, yet this widow held it like it meant everything. The widow kept her eyes lowered, fingers gently touching the check, as if it carried the warmth of someone she lost. Her late husband had written that will with his last strength, leaving behind the only thing he could give her. But the billionaire's son saw none of that pain, only a chance to show how powerful and untouchable he felt. "Is this really the inheritance?" he mocked loudly, shaking his head while others in the room shifted uncomfortably. The lawyer did not smile or react. He simply watched the young man carefully, as if measuring his character. Years of legal work had taught him that the loudest people in the room often understood the least. The widow finally lifted her eyes, and for a moment they carried a quiet strength that no one expected. She was not angry, not ashamed, only tired from a life that had already taken almost everything from her. And deep inside the lawyer's briefcase rested documents that would soon make that laughter disappear forever. The billionaire's son pushed the $10 check across the table with 2 fingers, laughing as if the moment was pure entertainment. "Keep it," he said loudly, his voice dripping with arrogance, certain the widow had nothing else left in this story. A few people in the room exchanged uncomfortable looks, sensing the cruelty behind his careless smile. But the widow did not argue or defend herself. She simply watched the lawyer as if waiting for something more. The lawyer slowly closed the envelope again, his calm expression hiding the truth that was still untouched. He had seen greed before, but the disrespect in this room reminded him why this meeting truly mattered. "Mr. Carter," he said quietly to the billionaire's son, "this is only the first item mentioned in the will." The laughter faded slightly as the young man raised an eyebrow, still amused but now curious. "What do you mean, first item?" he asked, leaning forward as the room suddenly grew very still. The lawyer opened his briefcase again, pulling out a thick folder that looked far more important than a $10 check. The widow's breathing slowed because she already knew what those papers might reveal about her late husband's final secret. And within those pages was a truth that would soon turn the billionaire's son's confident smile into silence. The billionaire's son leaned forward with a smirk, convinced the lawyer was only stretching a small story for drama. "Another $10, maybe?" he joked, drawing a few awkward laughs from the people standing behind him. But the lawyer did not react to the sarcasm, his calm eyes fixed on the young man across the table. He slowly opened the thick folder, revealing several documents carefully arranged with official seals and signatures. The room grew quiet as the widow folded her trembling hands together, her heart beating with silent memories. For years she had protected a secret her husband never wanted revealed unless the right moment arrived. The billionaire's son still looked amused, tapping his fingers on the table as if waiting for another joke. But the lawyer finally spoke again, his voice steady and firm enough to silence the entire room. "Your father's will contains a second instruction that must be carried out immediately after the first." The young man frowned slightly now, sensing the tone had changed in a way he did not expect. The lawyer slid a single paper across the table, its heading marked with the words, "Property Transfer Authorization." And suddenly, the widow's small $10 inheritance no longer seemed like the real story at all. The billionaire's son picked up the document casually, still expecting another pointless detail meant to waste his time. His smile faded slightly as he noticed the official stamps and the name of a large estate written clearly. "This property," the lawyer said calmly, "was placed under special protection in your father's final will." The room fell silent as everyone leaned closer, trying to understand what the document truly meant. The young man's confident grin slowly turned into confusion as he read the words again carefully. According to the document, a hidden countryside estate had been transferred to the widow years before. Gasps filled the room when the lawyer explained that the $10 was only a symbolic inheritance. The real gift was something the widow had quietly protected for more than a decade. The billionaire's son slammed the paper on the table, his voice suddenly sharp with disbelief. "That estate belongs to my family," he snapped, anger rising as the truth started slipping from his control. But the lawyer remained calm, sliding another document forward that carried the final legal confirmation. And in that moment, the laughter that once filled the room vanished into a heavy, stunned silence. The billionaire's son stared at the papers again, his face losing the confidence that once filled the room. "This has to be a mistake," he muttered, his voice lower now as doubt slowly replaced his arrogance. But the lawyer calmly pointed to the signature at the bottom, the unmistakable name of the young man's father, the same father he once believed had left everything to him without question or condition. The widow watched quietly, her eyes filled with old memories that no document could fully explain. Years ago, when the businessman lost everything during a financial collapse, it was her husband who helped him survive. They had been friends long before the fortune existed, long before money began dividing their lives. When the billionaire rebuilt his empire, he promised he would repay that loyalty one day. But he never told his son about the promise, knowing pride could easily poison the truth. So in his final days, he secretly arranged the estate to be given to the widow who once saved his future. The young man slowly sat down, realizing the story he mocked was built on a debt older than his wealth. And, for the first time in that room, the widow was no longer the poorest person there. The billionaire's son remained silent, staring at the table as the truth settled heavier than any fortune he owned. Moments earlier, he had laughed at a $10 inheritance, certain the widow had nothing worth respecting. Now, every word he spoke earlier echoed in his mind like a cruel reminder of his arrogance. The lawyer closed the folder slowly, giving the young man time to understand what his father had truly done. Outside the windows, the sun had almost disappeared, leaving the room wrapped in a quiet evening glow. The widow stood up carefully, holding the small check again as if it carried a deeper meaning now. To him, it was never about the money, she said softly, remembering the man who once called her family. He only wanted to keep a promise made when neither of them had anything in this world. The billionaire's son lowered his eyes, feeling a shame he had never experienced before. For the first time, he saw the widow not as a stranger, but as part of a history he never cared to learn. His father's legacy was not just wealth or power, but loyalty that lasted far beyond success. And in that quiet moment, the young man realized the inheritance he truly lost was his father's respect. The billionaire's son slowly stood from his chair, the arrogance that once filled his voice now replaced with quiet regret. He looked at the widow again, this time seeing the strength of someone who carried years of silent loyalty. The $10 check still rested in her hand, but now it felt heavier than any fortune in the room. For the first time in his life, the young man understood that wealth could never measure a person's true worth. He stepped closer to the widow, his voice no longer proud, but careful and sincere. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, realizing his father had tried to teach him something he had ignored. The widow simply nodded, because forgiveness often comes easier to those who have suffered the most. The lawyer watched the moment silently, knowing this meeting had changed more than just ownership of land. Outside, the evening wind moved through the trees as if the past itself had finally found peace. The widow would soon visit the hidden estate, the place where a forgotten promise had quietly waited for years. But the young man would leave that room carrying something far more valuable than property or inheritance. The story ends here, but the mystery lives on. Like, subscribe, and return for the next unforgettable journey.